I need to read the skill files and check the uploaded names list before writing. Let me review what's needed and write the story directly. The names to avoid are already in the document above. Let me write the story now. The night I almost lost everything started with a post-it note stuck to my front door. I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour shift at the pharmacy. My feet hurt. My lower back had been complaining since around hour 8. I was carrying 2 bags of groceries in one hand, my work bag in the other, and my keys were somewhere at the bottom of my purse, which, of course, I couldn't find until I'd already set everything down on the porch step. It was one of those evenings where the smallest inconvenience feels like the universe is personally targeting you. I almost missed the note entirely. It was pale yellow, folded in half, pressed flat against the door just below the peephole. My name wasn't on it. No greeting. Just 7 words in blue ballpoint, printed carefully, like someone had taken their time. Don't leave your car in the garage tonight. I stood there on my porch for a moment, grocery bags at my feet, reading it again. Then a third time. My first thought was that it was meant for someone else. We'd only moved into the house on Clover Mill Road 8 months ago, and I still didn't know most of my neighbors beyond a wave from the driveway. My husband traveled for work. He was in Denver that week, and our daughter, Iris, was 9 years old and had been at her after-school program since 3. It was just me coming home to a quiet house, same as most Tuesdays. My second thought was that it was a prank, some kid in the neighborhood with too much time and not enough supervision. I actually laughed a little, that short exhale you do when something strikes you as absurd. I folded the note and tucked it in my jacket pocket, moved my car out of the garage anyway, not because I believed it meant anything, but because I figured I'd need to make a Target run later, and it was easier to just leave it in the driveway. I forgot about it almost immediately. Iris needed help with a book report. I made pasta. We watched about 20 minutes of a nature documentary before she fell asleep on the couch, which meant I had to carry her to bed, which is harder than it sounds when your kid is 9 and refuses to stay small. By the time I got her settled and came back downstairs, it was almost 9:30. I poured myself a glass of water, thought briefly about wine, decided against it, and went to lock up for the night. That's when I found the second note. This one was on the inside of my back door, which I had locked when I came home. I was certain of it. I always lock the back door first. It's a habit I started after we moved in because the neighborhood felt unfamiliar and the back of the house faced a shared alley that I didn't love. The note was tucked under the edge of the doormat, just barely visible, a corner of white paper sticking out. They know your schedule. Don't call from inside. A neighbor who is watching out for you. My stomach dropped. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood completely still in my kitchen for what felt like a very long time, but was probably about 4 seconds. Then I turned around slowly and looked at every window I could see from where I was standing. The curtains were closed. The house was quiet. Iris was asleep upstairs. My hands had gone cold. I didn't know who had put that note there, or how they'd gotten inside to do it. Or if they'd been inside at all. Maybe they'd slid it under the back door from outside, and it had caught on the mat. I didn't know if the person who left it was trying to help me, or if this was something else entirely, some kind of setup, someone trying to get me to do something, go somewhere, open a door I shouldn't open. What I did know was that my 9-year-old daughter was asleep 20 feet above my head, and whatever was happening, I was alone. I grabbed my phone from the counter and walked into the downstairs bathroom, the one room in the house with no exterior windows, and I sat down on the edge of the tub and called 911. I kept my voice as low as I could. The dispatcher, a woman who sounded calm in the way that people who have heard everything sound calm, asked me to describe what I'd found. I read her both notes, word for word. She asked if I'd seen anyone outside, if anything looked disturbed, if any windows or doors appeared to have been opened. The answer to all of it was no. She told me to stay where I was and that she was sending a unit to my address. How long? I asked. 12 to 15 minutes, she said. Stay on the line with me. 12 to 15 minutes is a short amount of time when you're waiting for coffee to brew. It is an enormous amount of time when you are sitting on the edge of a bathtub in the dark, listening to every sound your house makes, wondering if any of them are new. I kept thinking about Iris upstairs. I kept thinking about whether I should go up and get her, bring her into the bathroom with me. I kept thinking about the second note. They know your schedule. Which meant someone had watched me. Not once, not by accident. Someone had paid enough attention to know what time I left the house in the mornings, what time I came home, whether my husband was around. That thought was worse than any of the rest of it. The idea that I had been seen, studied, without ever knowing it. At some point during those 12 minutes, I heard something from the front of the house. It was subtle, a sound I wouldn't have noticed on a normal night, a soft scraping, like something being dragged slowly across concrete. I pressed closer to the bathroom door and held my breath. The dispatcher was still talking to me, asking me something, and I whispered to her that I thought I heard a noise. She told me to stay where I was and not to open any doors. I didn't need to be told twice. The scraping sound stopped. There was a pause that felt physical, like pressure, and then I heard voices. Low, male, 2 of them at least. They weren't in the house, I was almost sure of that, but they were close. Close enough that I could hear the rhythm of conversation without making out words. My hands were shaking. I was gripping my phone so hard, my knuckles ached. And then there was a knock at my front door, loud and official, 3 solid raps. A voice called out, "Police department, anyone home?" The voices outside went quiet. Then I heard footsteps, fast ones, moving away from the house. The sound of something heavy being dropped, a hollow metallic clang, and then running. I came out of the bathroom. I went to the front door, hands still shaking, and looked through the peephole. 2 officers stood on my porch, flashlights up. I opened the door. One of them, a woman with her hair pulled back tight, looked at me steadily. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I said I didn't know yet. It took me another hour to fully understand what had happened that night. The officers found 2 men at the far end of the alley behind my house, about a block and a half away. They'd dropped what they were carrying when they ran, a length of wire, a bolt cutter, and a container of accelerant. According to what the officers told me later, the 2 men had been outside my garage for some time before I'd arrived home. When they realized the car wasn't there, they adjusted. My garage connects to my kitchen through an interior door. The plan, as it was eventually pieced together, had been to get into the garage first. The reason it took me a while to process this is that it made no sense to me. I'm a pharmacist. I fill prescriptions. I counsel people on drug interactions and whether they should take ibuprofen with their blood pressure medication. I am not someone who imagines herself as a target of anything. I drive a 7-year-old sedan and I bring muffins to the staff meetings and I go home every night to help my daughter with her homework. But it turned out that doing your job can be enough. 8 months before that night, about 3 weeks before we even moved to Clover Mill Road, I had flagged a prescription at the pharmacy where I worked. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even unusual, not for someone in my field. A man had come in with a written prescription for a controlled substance, and something about it was off. The dosage was unusual for the presenting condition. The prescribing doctor's information didn't fully match what we had on file. I followed protocol, which meant I placed a verification hold and notified the appropriate channels. The prescription turned out to be fraudulent. The man was arrested. I gave a statement to investigators. I didn't think about it very much after that. These situations happen in pharmacy work, and while they're unpleasant, they're also part of the job. I didn't know that the man had a brother. I didn't know that the brother had spent several months believing, incorrectly, that I had gone out of my way to target his family. I didn't know that he'd found out where I worked from a legal document. My name had appeared in the investigation paperwork, and that from there, it apparently hadn't taken very long to find out the rest. The note on my front door had come from my neighbor across the street. He was a man in his late 60s who I knew only enough to wave to. I'd learned his name exactly once when we first moved in, and I'm ashamed to say I had forgotten it by the following week. He told the police that he'd been sitting on his porch 2 evenings in a row and noticed a car parked at the corner that didn't belong in the neighborhood. He'd seen the same 2 men walk past my house more than once. He didn't know what they were planning, but he knew enough to know something was wrong. He said he left the note on my door because he wasn't sure I'd believe him if he knocked and tried to explain. He thought a note might make me cautious without alarming me unnecessarily. The second note, the one inside the back door, had also come from him. He had not entered my house. He had slid it under the back door from the alley side, which was accessible from the street, at some point in the early evening before I got home. He wanted to make sure I saw something even if I dismissed the first one. "I didn't want to scare you," he told the police. "I just wanted you to be careful." When I finally went upstairs that night, it was past midnight. The officers had cleared the house. Iris hadn't woken up through any of it. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. I thought about how I'd laughed at the first note, how I'd folded it up and put it in my pocket and immediately gone back to thinking about dinner and homework and whether there was enough milk for the morning. How completely ordinary the beginning of that evening had felt. I thought about Iris sleeping down the hall, about my husband in Denver, who I'd called somewhere around the second hour of all this, and who had booked a flight home before I even finished explaining what was going on. I thought about the fact that I had moved my car without even really deciding to, just muscle memory, convenience, the vague intention of a Target run I never ended up making. And I thought about a man in his late 60s sitting on his porch in the late afternoon, noticing something that wasn't his business to notice, and deciding anyway that it was worth doing something about. I went over to his house the next morning. I brought the muffins I usually take to staff meetings. Blueberry, which I make from a recipe my own mother used when I was Iris's age. It felt inadequate. It was inadequate. But I didn't know what else to do with the size of what I felt. He answered the door in a cardigan. His name was Walter. I had forgotten it, and now I will never forget it again. He told me he was glad I was all right. He told me he'd been a little worried that the notes might have confused more than helped. He said his late wife had always told him his communication style left something to be desired. I stood on his porch and cried, which I don't usually do in front of people I barely know. He handed me a paper towel from inside the door, matter-of-factly, and didn't make a big thing of it. "You moved the car," he said. "That's what mattered." Both men were arrested. They faced several charges, including criminal conspiracy and possession of tools related to arson. My name appeared in legal documents again, and this time I knew exactly why, and I read every page. The brother, the one who'd set all of it in motion, had believed that I had personally sought to destroy his family's life over a bureaucratic technicality. He was wrong about my motives and wrong about nearly everything else. But his anger had been real, and it had found a direction, and that direction had been me. My husband called me from Denver that first night, wanting to know how something like this could happen to someone like us, and I didn't have a good answer. I still don't, not entirely. There is no profile that makes a person immune to being noticed by the wrong people. I did my job. I followed protocol. I went home. What I know now that I didn't know before is that I was not as invisible as I thought I was. None of us are. The man at the corner was watching me. Walter across the street was watching him. My daughter's school had a file on our family's emergency contacts. My name was on a legal document in a county record system. We are all more visible than we feel. The part that took the longest to settle, longer than the fear, longer than the legal process, longer than the weeks I spent double-checking window locks and jumping at noises I'd never noticed before, was the part where I had to reckon with the note itself. I had laughed at it if I had not moved the car. If I had dismissed the second note, which, honestly, I might have done if the first one hadn't already put me on edge. If I had decided that the whole thing was weird and gone to bed early and not walked through the kitchen before locking up, 100 small moments where things could have gone differently, and in most of those alternate versions of that night, Iris and I are still in the house when they get into the garage. I carry that with me, not in a paralyzing way. I have Iris to take care of and a job to go to, and a husband who now calls me from every work trip to confirm I've locked up, which is both sweet and faintly exhausting. But I carry it. I also carry something else now. About 2 months after everything happened, Walter knocked on my door with a casserole dish covered in foil. He said his daughter had made too much and he didn't want it to go to waste, which I suspected wasn't entirely true but didn't say so. Iris answered the door before I could get there and immediately asked him if he wanted to come in and see her hamster, which is the kind of social boldness that 9-year-olds have and adults lose somewhere along the way. He came in. He met the hamster, whose name is Captain Crumbs, and who did not behave particularly well during the introduction. He stayed for about 45 minutes and told Iris about the neighborhood as it had been 20 years ago, when there was a small hardware store on the corner and a family that kept chickens 2 streets over. He comes for dinner every few weeks now. He and my husband have gotten into the habit of talking about baseball in a way that goes on longer than it probably needs to, and Iris has decided he is basically an adopted grandfather, which he seems to find more amusing than inconvenient. I thought I knew my neighborhood when I moved here. I thought 8 months of waving from driveways and knowing the rough location of the nearest coffee shop was enough to feel settled somewhere. It wasn't. But it's getting there. There are things I do differently now. I vary the time I leave in the mornings when I can. I know the names of 4 neighbors on my street, which is more than before, and I intend to keep going. I pay attention to cars I don't recognize. I take the small things seriously, the notes, the odd feelings, the moments that don't quite fit, instead of filing them under probably nothing and moving on. And I never, not once, park in the garage without thinking about Walter on his porch that afternoon, noticing something no one asked him to notice. He didn't know me well enough to owe me anything. We'd waved at each other across the street for 8 months, and that was the whole of our relationship. He owed me nothing. He did it anyway. I used to think that the kindness of strangers was something you read about, a phrase people put on social media next to sunsets, something that happened to other people in the kinds of stories that get shared around and liked a lot and then forgotten. I didn't disbelieve in it exactly. I just didn't think about it in relation to my own life, which is ordinary and mostly predictable and doesn't tend to produce the kinds of moments worth telling. But here I am, telling it, because it happened, because a man I barely knew watched my house from his porch and wrote a note in careful blue ballpoint and slid it under 2 different doors. And because of that, I came out of a bathroom at midnight to open my front door for 2 officers while my daughter slept through the whole thing and woke up in the morning wanting pancakes, completely unaware. That's the part I come back to most. Iris, making her case for blueberry pancakes at 7:30 in the morning, not knowing. I want her to not know for as long as possible. I want her mornings to be about pancakes and hamsters and book reports and whatever the nature documentary decided to do with its last 20 minutes. I want to protect all of that, with everything I have. And I'm grateful, more than I know how to say, that on one Tuesday evening when I was tired and my feet hurt and I almost missed a pale yellow note on my front door, someone else was helping me do it. I've thought a lot about what it means to actually pay attention. Not the kind of attention we perform, scrolling through neighborhood apps, glancing at security camera footage, nodding along when someone talks. I mean the kind that costs you something. The kind where you sit with an uneasy feeling long enough to act on it instead of talking yourself out of it. Walter sat on his porch 2 evenings in a row and watched a car that didn't belong. He didn't know me. He didn't know Iris. He had no reason to get involved in whatever was unfolding across the street, and plenty of easy reasons not to. It wasn't his problem. Nobody asked him. And yet he sat there, and he noticed, and he did something about it. Twice, in fact, because he wasn't sure once would be enough. That's not a small thing. That's actually an enormous thing dressed up in very quiet clothes. I used to believe that the people who do right by strangers are somehow built differently from the rest of us, that they have a particular gene for courage or a childhood that wired them toward selflessness, something that explains the gap between them and everyone else who looks away. But I don't think that anymore. I think Walter made a choice, the same way you or I make choices. And the difference was that he made it in the direction of someone else's safety instead of his own comfort. That's the part that stays with me. Not the danger, though the danger was real, and I don't minimize it. But the choice, the ordinary, unremarkable, enormously consequential choice to fold a piece of paper in half and walk across the street. What happened to me that night was, in the end, a consequence of someone else's anger finding a direction. The man who sent those two to my house had convinced himself that I had ruined his family on purpose. He was wrong. Completely, factually wrong. But his certainty didn't require accuracy. That's how it works with resentment when it's left alone long enough. It builds its own logic, finds its own targets, and moves. The cause and the effect were separated by months and miles, and I never saw it coming. But Walter did, not the specifics. He couldn't have known the whole story. He just knew that something was wrong and that the woman across the street deserved a chance to protect herself and her daughter. I think about Iris a lot when I turn this story over in my mind. She woke up the morning after and asked for blueberry pancakes. She had no idea. She got to have that. The ordinary morning, the hamster, the nature documentary she still hasn't finished, because a retired man I'd waved at 8 times chose to be inconvenienced by someone else's problem. That is what integrity looks like when it's not performing for anyone. It's a post-it note in blue ballpoint. It's a folded piece of paper slid under a door in an alley. It's doing the right thing when no one is watching, and no one will ever know you did it unless you tell them, which Walter never tried to do. I know his name now. I will know it for the rest of my life. And I think the most honest thing I can say, the thing that this whole experience has actually taught me, is that being the kind of person who notices and acts is not something you either are or aren't. It's something you practice or you don't. Walter practiced it his whole life, apparently, quietly, across the street. I had 8 months to learn his name, and I didn't bother. I'm paying better attention now.